We played both games last week, the Dungeons and the Dragons. We had a great time. I had a blast, and I'm really looking forward to talking about how it went. Hey everybody, Matt Colville here. Between last week and this week, I sent out an email to everybody describing the magic items they found because Salar Baremantle, Lars' druid, cast plant growth in the pool, the cesspool that the trolls had been using, and successfully got the plants to lift up all the treasure and coins and everything that were at the bottom of the pool, so the players didn't have to wade into it, the characters, not the players. So the characters didn't have to wade into the pool and get filth all over them. And in there was a suit of scale mail, magic scale mail, that was bronze scale mail. Each scale I described as having a rune pounded into it. It's all the same rune, but it's faded. The bronze is so old. I like using bronze stuff to imply ancient armor. An analogy to the real world. Here in the real world, if you found a bronze weapon, that would be a very old weapon. They also found a bronze broadsword that was magical, and I described broadswords aren't native to 5th edition, so I had to come up with a rule for them, and I decided they do 2d4 damage. They can be used two-handed or one-handed, they're versatile. And 2d4 just means your odds of rolling a 1 are, well, you can't actually, but your odds of rolling an 8 are actually somewhat lower. You're more likely to get the average than you are on a d8. So that was just a little tweak I threw in to make it so that this ancient civilization, whatever it was, their armor and weapons are slightly different than the modern stuff you find in the player's handbook. But they also found a ring. They found a ring and they identified it. They identified all their stuff, and it's a ring of animal influence, which they gave to Salar Baremantle because he's the druid. When last we left our heroes, the Shield of Gravesford had killed the Otyug, the rot elemental as the gnomes had been calling it because they don't know what an Otyug is, but there were a bunch of trolls missing. They had killed the troll shaman, the leader of the slavering trolls, but when they came back after having kind of retreated for a little while and healed up, they found all the trolls down in this branch of the troll war and were missing. And they know there's somewhere, so they start investigating. They go down different branches of the troll war that they hadn't investigated. They go down one where they knew a bunch of trolls had been, but those trolls are all gone now. They don't know where they are. There's a big pool in the back of the cavern, and as they investigate the pool, they find a whole bunch, like dozens, if not hundreds, of these fish. And the funny thing about these fish is that when the players were talking about all the different monsters they had fought in the Underdark, my friend Phil said, wow, whoever wrote this adventure really likes the Fiend Folio. Which may be true, I hadn't really put two and two together. I don't remember exactly which monsters are from the Fiend Folio. But when they found these fish, the first thing Phil said was, are they quippers? And that made me laugh because I actually don't know what a quipper is, but in fact, that is exactly what was originally in this pool, according to the description in the adventure Night Below, which is what I'm running. But when I read it, I was like, what is a quipper? So I just replaced them with piranha. So they're investigating this pool that used to be full of quippers until I took all them out and put a bunch of piranha in. And they recognize that this is obviously a dangerous pool. This is a hazard of some kind because there's a bunch of piranha in here. And if there are piranha in here, then presumably they're protecting some kind of treasure. And I don't mean protecting, this is a kind of metagame thinking, but this is how players think. I don't mean protecting as in it's their hoard. I mean protecting as in these are nasty fish. There must be something in this pool that warrants the players going after them. The players are trying to figure out, is there any treasure in this pool? Is there a way to find out if there's any treasure without walking into it and getting eaten by piranha? Phil turns to Lars at this point and says, dude, you're a druid. Can you not just talk to these fish? And Lars says, talk to the fish. And the rest of the party's like, yeah, talk to the fish. So Lars looks at his character sheet and goes, well, I didn't take Speak with Fish today, but I do have the Ring of Animal Influence, and it does let me cast Speak with Animals, so sure, I'll cast Speak with Animals. And I had described the Ring of Animal Influence as being like snake scales and two tiny emerald gems in the shape of snake eyes. And I was just thinking of Nog, the cobra from Rikki Tikki Tavi, and the way it charms animals. He points the ring into the pool, he uses a charge, and I described the fish that were in the local area. I mean, I intended there to be hundreds of fish in this pool, so the few dozen fish that are within range of the spell, all instead of swimming around randomly, all go voom, and are all looking at Salar Baremantle. At this point, the entire party is just tickled pink and fascinated at what is going to happen next. Salar Baremantle is talking to these fish. He hasn't said anything yet, but just the fact that he can speak to them has the fish's attention. Because none of the other characters can speak with fish, I had the entire conversation as the piranha with Lars over Google Hangouts. So we're both on our phone texting each other, and he has to relay what the piranha are saying to the rest of the heroes. I asked Lars, what do you say to the piranha? And Lars said, well, I'll just ask them how they're doing. I described the piranha as looking up at him out of the pool and saying, eat, 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 eat. I meant eat, 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 eat as their kind of normal state of being, but I think Lars interpreted it as a request. So Lars grabbed some bread from his pack and he tosses them some breadcrumbs and they immediately gobble it up and they go, thanks. And now Salar Baremantle is having a conversation with a bunch of piranha. They ask for more, so he gives them some more, and they literally said, oh my god, you're the best. Like, that is literally what they said. We had the entire conversation over Google Hangouts. Salar Baremantle asks if there are any weapons or armor down there. He's looking for magic items, and the fish are like, what are those? And he says, is there anything sharp and pointy down there? And they're like, oh yeah, lots of stuff. The piranha tell them that there's a big spiky thing down there and a big curved flat thing, which the players correctly interpret as a morning star or a flail. That's true, it was that. Oh, and a shield, and it was a shield. He asks the piranha if they can bring him the weapon and armor that's down there, and they're like, no way, man, it's too big. He asks if there's any money down there, any shiny objects, any tiny shiny objects, and the fish all swim away and they come back with little gold coins in their beaks. At this point, the players are super interested in what's down there. But there are still dozens, if not hundreds, of other piranha that are not affected by Sailor Baremantle's spell. They try to get other information out of the piranha. They ask the piranha where the trolls are, and the piranha say, "What's a troll?" Sailor says, "If I come into the pool, can you lead me to where the treasure is?" And the piranha are like, "No, fuck you!" Which really surprised Lars. He said, "I thought these piranha were my friend." And I'm like, "No, you have speak to animals. You don't have make animals your friend." There was some confusion at that point because I was trying to figure out why Lars didn't just use the Ring of Animal Influence, which he was using to speak to these creatures, to cast animal friendship on them. But that was my fault because I described him as talking to a school of piranha, and he had already looked up animal friendship, and it only works on one animal. So he felt like, well, that's not going to be useful. I'll get one fish to be my friend, and then thousands will come eat me. And when I realized that was the confusion, I explained, no, yeah, that makes sense, but this is a school of piranha you're talking about. It's a swarm. There are rules in the monster manual for swarms. This is one swarm of animals, so I'm treating them all as one animal. There are several swarms in this pool, but this is the swarm that you are talking to. When I explained that, Lars went, "Oh, okay, great, yes, I will definitely cast animal friendship on these fish." Then Sailor asks the piranha if they will lead him to the treasure, and they're like, "Fuck yeah, we will!" I described the piranha as being like tiny little headbangers. They're really enthusiastic about violence. With the piranha that he's befriended protecting him from the other piranha in this pool, he is able to wade into the water and go recover the flail and the shield that they had described. And then he asks them if they can just go gather all the coins. And I said, sure, for the duration of this spell, these piranha will go out and they'll gather all the coins that are down here. There are hundreds, if not thousands of coins in this pool, and they'll bring them to the shore. So the elven druid, Sailor Baremantle, now has a school of piranha that are his buddy. They leave that cave with the treasure they collected and the piranha grabbing all the coins that are down there for them, and they go into the next cave, which they know there are some troglodytes down, but it turns out there are like 40 or 50 troglodytes down here. The players really don't want to fight 40 or 50 troglodytes because even though they're only like one hit die creatures, there are a ton of them, and even if they win, it's going to be a huge slog. As the players are trying to discover how many troglodytes are down here, I have the troglodytes start throwing javelins at the heroes, and one of them legitimately hits Nicodemus, even though he has an AC of like 23, I think. The guy rolled at 19. I think that sent an interesting signal because it showed that even though these troglodytes are only these one hit die creatures, they're going to be throwing a lot of javelins, and at that rate, they're going to be rolling. Even if I have an AC of 24 or 23 like Nicodemus, you're still going to take some hits. Having had some success negotiating with the trolls before last week when they fought and killed the troll shaman, and the other troll mutants said, hey, why don't you leave us alone for a little while and we'll give you your night back, the players now feel a little bit confident in negotiation, and TJ playing Keck has the idea of going and getting the head of the shaman that EJ had knocked off, that Count of Rend had lopped her head off in battle, and bringing it to the troglodytes and showing it to them and throwing it down in front of them. And I say, are you going to do that? You know, there's always this back and forth between a player saying, we should, blah, 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 and then them actually deciding to do that. Many times the players don't realize that the plan they're talking about they haven't executed it yet because they haven't told me they're doing it. They've gone from thinking about it, proposing it, to sort of agreeing and building consensus, but they've never pulled the trigger. It's often my job, therefore, to remind the players that they haven't said they're doing this yet. Are you going to do that? Is that your plan? When Keck shows the troglodytes the head of Ash, the shaman of the trolls, I had all the troglodytes gasp in reaction. The players then knew their plan had a chance of succeeding. They throw the head to the troglodytes, and the troglodytes all surround it and take it back into the cave. At this point now, the trogs are not trying to attack them, so the players start discussing, what are we going to ask these guys? Once they decided what they wanted to know from the troglodytes, I asked TJ how he was going to try to persuade these guys. Are you going to make a persuasion check or an intimidation check? Now, these are both charisma-based skills, so to a certain extent, it's 6 of one, half dozen of another, and Keck doesn't have a high charisma, but my tradition is that if you exhibit some great feat of strength, then I will typically give you advantage on your intimidation check. Whereas if you know something really useful, if you've remembered some important detail, I might give you advantage on your persuasion check. TJ decides Keck's going to make a persuasion check, but before he does, I tell the players that they see this fire burning in the darkness of the cave ahead. And they're like, what is it? I said, it looks like a big torch and it's kind of bobbing bobbing up and down. And the players are like, what is going on? What is that? And somebody says, wait, is it the head of the troll shaman? And I said, it is the head of the troll shaman. The troglodytes have taken the head of the troll shaman and spit it upon a pike, lit it on fire, and are carrying it around and dancing around it. The players are like, that's awesome. And they knew at that point that the trogs were going to be their friends. Keck makes his persuasion check. He rolls well. And they have a whole conversation with the leader of the troglodytes, who was the one carrying the head of Ash the shaman. Really, all the troglodytes want is to be left alone. And the players are happy to say, listen, we've taken care of the trolls. And the troglodytes are like, no, you haven't. There's a ton of trolls down here. The players ask, how many trolls? And at first I had the troglodytes go, there's one, two, many. But I thought, no, the troglodytes are smart enough to have a rough idea of how many trolls are actually down here and where they are. The players asked for a map of the cave system. I said, no problem. The troglodytes definitely know this cave system really well. They've been here longer than the trolls. I had the troglodyte chieftain draw on the floor of the cave a map of the warrens describing which trolls were where. The players were hoping that they could enlist the troglodytes in the battle against the trolls, and the troglodytes were like, no, we are not doing that. The heroes were persuasive, but they weren't that persuasive. Troglodytes are chaotic evil, and as far as I'm concerned, primitive chaotic races like this in my game, the only thing they respond to are shows of strength. So if the heroes wanted the troglodytes to help them fight the trolls, then the heroes needed to do something like kill the troglodyte chieftain and try to take over the troglodyte tribe. I didn't tell them that, by the way. This isn't foreshadowing. That's just my attitude toward chaotic primitive races, is that they only respond to strength. They follow the leader of their tribe because he's the strongest, and when someone else can challenge the leader and take over, well, then that one's the strongest and we should do what he says. I mean, this is not entirely unlike many actual primitive human races, this is how the Fremen behave in Dune. The troglodyte chieftain describes Greechak, the head of the trolls, as being one of these trolls. The players have no idea what this means, and they debate it and they're trying to figure out, and the troll chieftain doesn't speak their language. He speaks troglodyte. But they discover that there's about another 20 trolls down here, and when they find that out, they're like, oh my god, 20 trolls. There's like a troll army down here, basically. And that the trolls from the Slaverer tribe, the drooling trolls, because they lost their shaman, they all now belong to Greechak's tribe, the top-knot trolls. The heroes successfully negotiate with the troglodytes. They get what they want out of them. They know where the trolls are. They have a map of the warrens, and they agree to leave the troglodytes in peace. I privately decided that if the future battle between the trolls was roughly even, if things were close and it was getting down to the wire, that I would have the troglodytes come in on one side or the other, depending on how nice the heroes had been to them. But as it turned out, that didn't happen. Stay tuned. Armed with a map of the rest of the cavern, the heroes go back into the main chamber of the troll warrens, basically the first room you encounter in the entrance, where there are several branching corridors that lead off in different directions. And Phil concocts an interesting plan. He says, listen, let's not fight all these trolls. Let's challenge their chieftain for control of the tribe. Now remember, I didn't say anything about how chaotic races work in my campaign. That's a piece of information I hadn't shared. This was something they came up with on their own. As soon as Phil said, let's challenge Greechak for control of the tribe, TJ loved that idea, and Keck is like, yes, we should do that. Of course, as soon as that idea came up, I had to sit there and start thinking about, okay, what am I going to do if they succeed at that? How do you challenge the chieftain for control of the tribe? Well, it would be single combat. Okay, what would single combat be? First of all, Greechak is not particularly inclined to fight one of the heroes because he might lose. That means the heroes are going to have to do something to force Greechak's hand, right? He's not going to want to die in single combat against the heroes. The reason he has a horde of trolls is so he doesn't have to do the fighting. I thought, all right, if whoever speaks for the trolls, and it basically has to be Keck because he's the only one that speaks giant. If Keck does the following, then there's a chance they will successfully be able to call out Greechak and fight him in single combat. First of all, he's going to have to make some kind of charisma check, either intimidation or persuasion. I set the DC at 20 because I thought this is going to be hard. Greechak does not want to die in single combat against these heroes. He has his troll minions for that. But I thought it should be possible for Keck to get advantage on this roll, and I figured this is how he does it. If he calls out Greechak by name, which means they have to remember the name that the troglodytes gave them, if he explicitly says, we have killed Ash, the leader of the Slaverer trolls, and if in some way Keck explicitly says, you are not worthy to command, then I'm going to give him advantage on the roll. Now this week, Anna was with us, so they had Alejandro de Modesto, and he was able to inspire them. So when Keck makes his roll, he's going to be adding the bardic inspiration to it. Salar Bearmantle is giving him guidance, but there's no guarantee because I haven't told them how to get advantage. I haven't even told them that advantage is possible. They're just trying to stack the deck in their favor. Keck walks into the central chamber that leads to the top-knot warrant, and he specifically calls out Greechak by name. And he explicitly says, we have killed Ash, the leader of the Slaverers. Then Kek said, "You are a coward, come out and face us." And behind the screen, I'm like, that's not going to be enough. It needs to explicitly say you are not fit to lead. Because Greechak doesn't care if a bunch of humans and dwarves call him a coward. But a formal challenge, that's a different story. Because all the other trolls in his tribe, I reason, would recognize that that is a formal challenge. Greechak must respond. And again, this rolls into my own personal philosophy of leadership in a society like this. It's all down to kind of a shared illusion. If all of the trolls thought that Greechak wasn't fit to lead, they could gang up on him and kill him. He might be the strongest, but he's not as strong as 19 other trolls. So he has to save face. Then Phil said, no, say you are not fit to lead. I think Phil and I think very similarly when it comes to this stuff. And TJ goes, oh yeah. You are not fit to lead. You are a coward. At this point, in every corridor in this room the heroes haven't gone down, there are trolls at the edge of the light listening and watching and waiting to see what'll happen. I asked TJ to roll. All the other players are saying, here are the advantages you're getting from us. And I told TJ, because of the way you phrased your challenge, you get advantage on the roll. So he rolled 2d20. He got a d8, I think, Bardic Inspiration. He got a d4 from Guidance. And I think he rolled like a 25 total or something. The trolls all shout and jeer and then suddenly go quiet. One troll, not the chieftain obviously, gets pushed into the cavern to talk to Kek. And this begins the negotiation. How do we know you're not going to betray us? The heroes negotiate with this troll and say, we won't use magic. We will retreat to the edge of the light, and you stay at the edge of the light, and then our champion will fight your champion. And of course, this troll is like, who is your champion? And everyone immediately points to Count Nicodemus, the Lord of Rend. Which, by the way, this wasn't EJ's idea. EJ wasn't the one that said, hey, I have an idea. I want to do single combat against a troll. In fact, EJ started to think, hang on, wait, what am I getting myself in for? Because while Nicodemus has a ridiculously high armor class, he doesn't have particularly many hit points. So EJ is a little concerned about what he's getting into, but he doesn't say no. He's like, all right, fine, I'll go for it. The heroes load Nicodemus up with all the buffs they can think of, but the buff that made the difference was from Salar Bearmantle, the Elven Druid. Haste. Haste gives Nicodemus +2 armor class. It gives him advantage on some saving throws that he didn't really need, but it also gives him an extra action every round. And because he's a warrior, when he takes an action to attack, he gets to attack twice. So that's an extra 2 attacks Nicodemus is going to be getting every round thanks to Salar Bearmantle. The heroes load up Nicodemus with all the buffs they have at their disposal, and they ask EJ if he's ready, and he's like, he's looking at his character sheet going, I'm just trying to figure out, what does this mean? What did the troglodytes, what were they trying to tell us? And the heroes literally have no idea. The shield of Gravesford retreat to the edge of the torchlight, leaving the Count of Rend, leaving Nicodemus alone in this chamber. They begin to hear the heavy footsteps of a giant troll approaching, and walking into this chamber lit by the torchlight is a massive mutant troll. He has 3 arms like the other trolls, but his clubs are larger. They do 3d8 instead of 3d6, larger than the other mutant trolls they fought, and this troll has 2 heads. The heroes are like, 2 heads? What does that mean? What is he going to do to us? While the players were loading Nicodemus up with buffs, I was sitting behind the DM screen thinking, okay, how can I make single combat interesting? I'm afraid it's going to be boring and just a hit point slog. There's only 2 characters, so there's not that many different things we're going to see happen. And I didn't really have time to look up like rules for single combat or anything like that. I just had to wing it. And so what I decided was we were going to do initiative every round. We were going to re-roll initiative every round. I suspected that would be a simple, straightforward way to make single combat exciting and tense. And as it turned out, I was right. Every round when it was time to roll initiative, all the players at the table were super interested in the result. I put Greechak's mini out there. I put Nicodemus's mini out there. There wasn't a map of the dungeon or anything. I didn't think we needed one. There wasn't going to be any maneuvering. There wasn't going to be any flanking. It was literally just going to be 2 very heavily armed and armored melee combatants slogging it out. This is the miniature I used for Greechak, and even though he doesn't have 2 heads, he was pretty impressive. Jim Murphy, thank you very much for lending me your trolls. I think I'm done with them. You can have them back. It's initiative. Combat begins. The battle for control of the Top Knot tribe starts, and it's fun because Nicodemus does not have a high dexterity. In fact, I think he has a penalty, and as it turns out, Greechak beat him on initiative. I rolled in front of the players, right? This is super dramatic. I did all my die rolling for this battle in front of the players. I think I gave Greechak about 270 hit points. I eyeballed it, and then once I had set those hit points, I didn't change them. I didn't fudge anything. I felt like, look, if Nicodemus can wipe this guy out fast, that's dramatic, and if Greechak can destroy Nicodemus quickly, that's dramatic. And the players were talking about, okay, what do we do if this thing just crushes Nicodemus? And of course, the heroes were like, well, then we're going to have to attack. But then if they do that, then all the trolls attack. And now they're going to take on 20 trolls and Greechak without Nicodemus? I think that would have been catastrophic, but super exciting. Greechak having 1 initiative, he gets 3 attacks against the Lord of Rend, the same number of attacks the mutant trolls with 3 arms get. And 3 attacks per round, I think he was at +8, and Nicodemus's armor class was 23. So I think he needs a 15 or better to hit. 3 attacks per round means he's going to hit, unless Nicodemus can kill Greechak very quickly, he's going to hit a couple of times. He attacks 3 times, poof, 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 and he hits twice. And then I have the second head go, and Greechak gets another 3 attacks. He's attacking 6 times per round. Now the heroes realize this could go badly. At that point, EJ says, I cast Shield. He is, after all, an Eldritch Knight. Shield gives him +5 to his armor class. His AC is normally 22. Now it's 27. And because he can do it as a reaction, it means that all of the attacks from Greechak miss. Now it's Nicodemus's turn. He attacks. He's like a Cuisinart. I think he gets like 6 attacks per round. Remember, he's getting 2 extra attacks per round thanks to Salar Bearmantle. And I think, based on the way this battle turned out, I think that haste spell from the Elven Druid played by Lars might have been the thing that turned the tide of battle. Nicodemus does a bunch of damage to the troll, but it's nowhere near enough to kill him. And now it's initiative again. The fact that it was initiative every round was incredibly tense and dramatic. I think if the battle had lasted much longer than 4 or 5 rounds, then having to roll initiative every round might have gotten boring, or it might have taken some of the tension out of it. But because it didn't feel like a slog, rolling initiative every round was actually a lot of fun. Nicodemus wins initiative this time. He does a bunch of damage to the troll Greechak, but then it's Greechak's turn. He attacks 6 times. And this time he crits. And that does 2 things. First, it does a ridiculous amount of damage to Nicodemus, because these clubs are each doing 3d8 plus like 5. Because Nicodemus is wielding the Shield of Andrim, anytime he's critted, a bell rings out. Like, even the troglodytes can hear the bell ringing through these caverns, and he is able to spend 1 of his hit dice. So he gets a little bit of healing, and I think that made a difference. But he still suffers 1 crit, and I think of the 6 attacks, 2 other attacks hit. So it was the equivalent of 4 hits. The battle continues for another round or 2, and eventually Nicodemus has 10 hit points and Greechak has 60. Which, based on the amount of damage these 2 characters do, means they're both 1 round away from dying. And that means it comes down to initiative. Even with his penalty to dexterity, Nicodemus wins initiative this time around and attacks with Wound, the great black iron axe of Bonebreaker Doricor. I describe Nicodemus as swinging Wound, and the razor-sharp edge cuts into Greechak's chest, and as he recoils in pain, you see the chest lift and separate, and his beating heart is exposed. Greechak drops his weapons, and his 3 arms wrap around his chest in a desperate attempt to keep his body whole, but it is too late. He falls to the ground. Dead. The players are all incredibly stoked. They all cheer. EJ was like, holy crap, this is probably the closest he's ever come to death. The heroes rush in, they heal Nicodemus, and I ask him if he's going to allow the trolls. The trolls are kind of trying to come in, they're bowing and scraping. They're trying to come into the chamber and retrieve the body of their dead chieftain. And EJ's like, yeah, I'll allow it. Several of the trolls come forward and they bow to Nicodemus. He is now their leader. The players are like, holy crap, EJ, you've got a troll tribe at your beck and call. I remind the players that the trolls, like the troglodytes, are a primitive, chaotic, evil people, and so they are going to eventually return to their ground state of not wanting to work for a half-orc. But for now, it means that Lord Nicodemus, the Count of Rend, is also the chieftain of the Topknot tribe. The trolls obviously don't really like it, but they will do what he tells them to do. How can they resist? He is, after all, the strongest. He destroyed their chieftain. At least for the moment, they feel like they have no chance against this guy. And that's where we left it. It was a great battle. It was an epic night. I think everybody had fun. I haven't talked to everybody specifically afterwards, but I made a point to go up to several of the other players, like Tom, for instance, and say, Tom, did you have a good time last night? And Tom was like, yeah, it was a blast. He was really enthusiastic about what happened. And he was conscious. He said, I didn't really do anything all night. He didn't make any rolls or anything, but he had a great time just participating in what was happening. Being part of that group was a lot of fun. So hopefully that gives you some ideas of how the heroes can solve problems in your game, of how to do stuff like single combat, of how primitive societies like troglodytes and trolls might work. The whole night I was just having such a good time watching Lars roleplay with the fish, and then watching the heroes negotiate with the troglodytes, and then watching the Count of Rend battle this troll. For me, it was a blast. I had a great time the entire evening. I really think this group, now that we don't have 2 disparate, it's the same group of players, but they're no longer running 2 different groups of heroes. I really feel like this was the moment where they became a team. Next week, I think they're going to start the trek down the long path to the city of the Glass Pool, which they know there are a lot of Grell on the way there, so they're going to get to fight a lot of Grell. And they've never fought Grell before. They have no idea what they do. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think the purpose of all these encounters is to make it so when the heroes finally reach the city of the Glass Pool, the Koatoa city, they feel like they've been through a lot. They feel like it's deep underground, and they had to go down many passageways and many trails and fight a lot of stuff to get there. And so far, that is working. Next episode, I think another episode of Running the Game. I think we'll go back to NPCs and talk about how to run high-level NPCs and what happens when the DM ends up running a PC in the group. There are no ads in front of my D&D videos. I do not have a Patreon, but if you want to help support the channel, I encourage you to come by my Amazon page. There's a link in the doobly-doo. I am, as I think you all know by now, an independent author. I have 2 books up. I'm working on my 3rd. Each book is $4, of which I get $3. So if you buy both books, you're throwing me $6. And with that money, by the way, I was able to buy this thing, which is currently hooked up to my camera and which allows me to record audio at the same time and with the same camera that I'm recording the video. I used to have to do it separately. I used to have to record the audio with my computer and the video with my camera and then have to sync them up afterwards, and that was a pain in the butt. So if you're wondering where your support goes, it goes to stuff like this. My goal, obviously, is just to make it easier and more fun for me to record videos, so I do it more often. Next episode, more on NPCs, I think. Until then, peace out.